So Eric, can you give us a little bit of background, your history with Net at Work and what it is that you do, and kind of tie that up with the topic of today, which is the importance of the technology roadmap for businesses.
Sure, Todd. So let's start off with Net at Work. Who is Net at Work? Net at Work is a small and medium business technology service provider, really helping organizations unleash the potential of their businesses. In my specific role with Net at Work is I lead our fractional chief information officer practice, in that we provide seasoned CIOs to our clients who need technology leadership, need leadership and change management and helping drive results. Most of the time, organizations know they need an ERP system or a CRM system, but they really have trouble with the strategy part of what they want to do. And so we're helping a variety of clients and industries getting to where they need to be to operate in what I say 2030 or 2035 to really help them operate in the future. And so that's what our practice is focused on.
And so the technology roadmap is a pretty important component of that effort. Can you tell us a little bit? We use a lot of the same methodologies in our engagement with clients, both at my former MSP and also at ITS. For those that may not be completely familiar with this idea of a technology roadmap, how would you describe that, and how might it be a little bit different than, let's say, the formal business plan that someone might put together?
Yeah. So starting at the top, I think of the technology roadmap as a planning tool for organizations within their IT strategic planning. So when I talk to people, I always ask them, okay, so do you have a vision for the company? Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years? And then what are the strategies to get you to that future vision? You want to grow, the vision is we want to be $100 million company. We want to have this many customers. We want to operate in these geographies. And the strategies are, what are you going to do to get to that future vision? And so one of the conversations that we have with our clients is, well, how strategic is technology for you guys to help you along that journey? Like we're taking you along this journey. So when I start talking about IT strategy with them, do you have IT strategy? And the first is to define what the IT strategy is. And then the technology roadmap are the different initiatives to realize that strategy, different initiatives within that strategy to get these organizations to where they need to be.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great answer. It's similar to what we do. I want to ask you, I'll tell you what we do, and then I want to see how similar it is to your methodology, like when you first engage with a new client, because we start the technology roadmap process really at the very beginning of an engagement with, even at the prospect level, even if someone hasn't yet decided to move forward with us to provide, IT management services. We're talking about doing some security vulnerability assessments, and that typically reveals some gaps in their security posture. And we talk to them about it from the very beginning of that engagement, that this is how we operate in a partnership with you moving forward, in the sense that we're going to identify these gaps, we're going to put together this initial roadmap, and it's going to have, by order of criticality, this is a red flag, we need to take care of this right away. Hey, we found some things here that they're functional, but they could be improved. And then here's a list of things that you're doing well. And so we start off with that initial assessment, and that technology roadmap is really part of our initial sort of onboarding project with this new client potentially. And then it's a wash, rinse, repeat process where every 4 to 6 months, we're going back and setting goals and making sure that there's some kind of alignment. So is that similar to what you're doing in the sense of, when do you start that process with someone that you might be working with? Do they come to you, or do you go to them and they see this for the first time as an option to improve their organization?
Sure. So I think most organizations right now that we work with are really lost on how do I implement technology. I hear all these different technology. I hear about AI. I hear about ERP, next gen ERP, CRM. I don't even know where to start. We've tried to do ERP implementations. We've tried to implement technology. Sometimes it works, sometimes it failed. So a lot of times people are coming to us with just, I have all these issues. I just can't get anything done. Can you please help me? Usually they're in a lot of pain when they come to us. And I
Yeah.
like what you said about doing the initial. That's what, because I always tell people, you got to figure out where you're at today to figure out where you need to be in the future. Because, you know, if I want to drive to Los Angeles, my journey is going to be very different if I'm leaving from San Francisco than if I'm leaving from my house in Cleveland. Like, that's a different journey, right?
Yeah.
Requires different resources, different timetables, different budget, et cetera. And the same is for where organizations are at. So we always start with what we call 360 assessment. Reviews people's process, reviews companies' people, process, and technology. Because at the end of the day, like, everybody always thinks, oh, technology roadmap, it's all about the technology. It's really not. It's technology is a tool that enables the people and the processes. So we always look at it from that 360 standpoint to include people and processes, because that's the tool that technology is using.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we come into a new engagement with with a prospective client, and a lot of times what we see is really evidence of a long-term sort of disjointed vision of how technology is implemented into their organization. Now, we typically look at it from, we have technology goggles on, right? So we're
Yeah.
typically looking at, okay, we need to shore up their foundation of their cybersecurity posture. We need to make sure they've got the proper licensing for the software they have, and we start a documentation process so that we can more effectively help them in the day to day. But that's really, at that level, that's kind of like table stakes. We want to move up the stack, if you will, of leadership management and start talking to them about, well, hey, what about your process? Do you have quarterly goals for the different functional areas of your organization, like finance or HR or operations or sales or marketing? And how are you um, setting goals for all of those departments? And what role could a functional technology integration, if you will, all these different software that help these different departments? Have you thought about how that, what that vision is, and what's the refresh cycle on that? How do you plan for 3 to 5 years out? Are you trying to get off of old legacy systems and try to move to the cloud? And so these are all of the considerations that we talk about, and try to guide them to a better place. A lot of it has to be driven by them because it's their company, right?
Yeah.
So let's shift gears a little bit and kind of talk a little bit more about what does the actual roadmap look like. It's probably not, unfolding a map.
No.
But what is the process for developing that roadmap? What does it look like? How's it different between different types of companies, or are they all kind of fundamentally the same? Maybe it's the 80-20 rule. Maybe 80% of the roadmaps are pretty similar, but we have to account for that 20% differential. And so tell us a little bit more about what you see out there with, as you go from an initial engagement through that first month or two, 6 months or a year. What does it start to look like for that organization, and what are some of the challenges?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot with that. I think starting out, like, what does it look like? People, there's a mystique with the technology roadmap. There's like this certain mystique to it, glamorous sounding, and I tell people it's a planning tool that you can easily build in Microsoft PowerPoint, and there's nothing glamorous about it. It's a visual timeline with initiatives or projects or outcomes that you're trying to achieve in a specific time frame. So I tell people, usually what we do for our clients is we put together 3-year technology roadmaps. And some clients, I have a few startup clients where they're startups. So a 3-year technology roadmap for them is way too much. And then I have other clients where they're multi-billion-dollar organizations, and a 3-year technology roadmap really doesn't make sense for them. They probably need a 5-year. And so, but the key thing to think about is it's a specific duration of time, and you revisit the roadmap and look at the initiatives on a specific cadence, whether it's monthly, quarterly. I'd say usually quarterly cadence. And then when we get into these roadmap building projects, there's different components to the roadmaps. You have the time frame that I said, but then each of those initiatives in the roadmap should really have a business case associated with it. Because I tell clients say, I want to do this and this and this and this. And I'm like, all right, you're only doing $48 million in revenue, and you're telling me you want to do this in the next 18 months. This is $5 million worth of projects. Are you really wanting to bite that off? And I'm sure you see that too, where people give you the laundry list of everything. You're like, well, this is millions of dollars, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's driven by, it's not always, sometimes it's a reactive type of approach. A lot of times in the small business space, let's say under 100 employees, 50, 25, some of these concepts are really, kind of new to them in terms of, we talked about this before, where they're operating on a daily basis, and they're doing their processes that sort of kind of got developed in a sort of a tribal knowledge sort of way. But in order to get to the next level, if they are setting, an outlook for, hey, everyone says they want to grow their business, right? But you're faced with some challenges that if you don't have proper, process and procedure, you could outgrow the ability of your team to actually get you to that next level, because you haven't really accounted for, that scalability portion. So for us, that's part of how the technology roadmap, helps identify that, what you're talking about there. Is this a realistic goal, and what's the priority that we need to place on, doing this implementation first? Do we have any like significant vulnerabilities or gaps that need to be addressed first? And I think we agree that, the security foundation is really important. And if you can get that in a good place first, you can sort of build on that foundation and start, um, building better processes, better procedures. In my experience, when you start growing a company, one of the first things that breaks down is effective communication between individuals and between departments. And so technology today can really solve some of those problems, because the collaboration tools we have now are, pretty mature. And, whether it's Slack or Teams or Zoom or Crowdcast or whatever. I mean, we're doing this podcast, and we're in completely different parts of the country, and reaching a lot of people. So I think that's pretty exciting. But how can, companies can start implementing these types of efficiencies in their own organization? So
I do want to mention, I like what you say about security, because I don't think a lot of companies are thinking of security in their technology roadmaps. And we almost, in our technology roadmaps that we deliver, the security looks pretty similar across a lot of organizations, because we're finding a lot of organizations aren't taking it seriously. And there's the component of cybersecurity, but then there's the component of, well, who's coming in to clean your offices at night? What type of information do you have out on your desktop? Executives are still printing financial reports and putting it out there. And then they have product launch reports and they're putting it out there. And you have people coming in, cleaning your offices. Do you know who's doing that? I was visiting a client, and, I'm walking around, and I can see all the financials literally on the tables just outside the executive office, because they're having a big meeting about it. And I think security, when you start thinking about security, it's almost repeatable, because from a base level for a lot of clients and a lot of industries, because just there's so many organizations that have underappreciated the security requirements in today's day and age.
Well, yeah, I just came back from a compliance conference in Atlanta, and it was a great conference. But one of the things the speaker had pointed out, you know, at an Office 365 like global worldwide, only like 30% of organizations have effectively implemented some sort of, two-factor, multi-factor authentication, and that is a glaring vulnerability if someone's password gets compromised. And that's what the bad guys are trying to do. So I think in the context of the technology roadmap, those components, that cybersecurity component, really needs to be part of that discussion. Like, where can we make improvements? What are the 3 or 4 things that we're not doing now that are relatively easy to implement that will give us some peace of mind and help us, move the ball forward on the actual, efficiencies beyond that? Because you're right. I mean, cybersecurity it's a necessary evil, if you will. It's not evil, but the people that are trying to take advantage of your organization don't have good intent, right? So we're trying to protect ourselves. And I think laying that out on the table, I think a lot of organizations just don't know where to start.
Mm-hmm.
And the roadmap itself is a great tool to sort of get that written out. What are the initiatives we need to address? What is the budget around this? What is the priority? And it's a living document. You revisit it every, quarterly, every 4 to 6 months, probably no less than twice a year, just to make sure that, you're allocating the correct budget for the correct solutions. A lot of times I go into an organization, and if they have an IT budget, it's kind of not particularly well thought out, and they're spending too much money on these things and not enough money here. So it's kind of a sanity check, and a second set of eyes, someone who's outside the organization that's going, oh, well, that's interesting. We work with a lot of organizations like yours, and they're doing it this way. Is that something that you might want to consider? So let's talk about best practices. I think we mentioned some of these things, but what do you see, Eric, as kind of fundamental best practices to getting started with implementing a technology roadmap? And does it require an outside agency to do that for you, or is it possible to, build that up internally? And what are the pros and cons of those two approaches?
Sure. So I, when we have a client that needs help building a technology roadmap, there's 2 types of clients for us. The first and we always ask the question, do you have a vision for the company, 5 years, 10 years? And kind of already talked about this. And do you have strategies to get to the vision? Half of our clients say, yes, we do. I'm like, okay. So for those clients, we'll help them define what their IT strategy is, and then put together the technology roadmap to support the IT strategy. The other half of the clients will ask them, do you have a vision for the whole company, not just IT, just where the whole company? Do you have strategies to support that? Have you gone through a strategic planning exercise? And say, no, we don't have anything like that. So we have to start with them at the top, say, all right, let's sit down, let's go through strategic planning for the whole organization. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? What are the strategies to get there? And let's talk about IT as a strategy and define the IT strategy for your company and the roadmap, and that all falls in. So really, we see 2 different types of organizations from that end, but the output is still the same, is that they have a vision, they have strategies to get to the vision, you have a information technology strategy and a technology roadmap. And so those are kind of the ways that we go in. And so from a best practice standpoint, to answer your question, you can't start the technology roadmap and have a really good result if you don't have the vision and the strategies for the entire organization set up first. It's a very hard thing to do. So I tell people it's a process. Start with strategic planning, get the vision, get the strategies. Let's talk about IT strategies as we're putting together those strategies, and let's put together a technology roadmap. And again, we always start with an assessment. We do a 360 assessment because you got to figure out where you're at in order to get to where you want to be. It's a very different journey for all sorts of organizations. The third party aspect to your question, I think it's interesting because a lot of times organizations don't talk internally. You mentioned this before, is you got finance and operations and HR. A lot of time they're doing different things that are actually conflicting with each other. I had a client where they were putting a solution in the purchasing department that was actually going to impact how the shop floor and how the warehouse deal with the materials that come in. And these two organizations, they weren't even talking to each other. So they had no idea that a solution that was going to fix something in purchasing was going to break more stuff downstream than it was going to fix for purchasing. And so I think having that third party expertise helps these people because it gets everybody in the room. Everybody can, air their thoughts, air their grievances, and start talking the same tune. Whereas if there's not that third party, that's more difficult to do. And it depends on the culture of the organization as well. There's leaders at organizations where they say, yes, we know we need a third party to do this because we're never going to get there ourselves. We have too much political infighting or we're just too busy. We need somebody to guide us through this. Whereas we have others that they say, we can get there on our own. We just need a little bit of help getting there when it comes to the technology piece.
Yeah, I tend to agree with the executive who stated that we could do this ourselves, but we would be more effective with some expertise. Like, I could probably do my own estate planning, right? But I didn't do that. I hired an estate planning attorney to help with that because
Sure.
of obviously years of expertise and I think it's a similar thing. I mean, one of the issues that we see when we come into a new organization, I think I mentioned this before, was sort of this evidence of like a disjointed vision on the technology that they did have, and not really an awareness of the proper sort of refresh cycles, and you end up with an organization that has some new technologies, and then they have these old sort of siloed legacy technologies that they have a difficult time getting away from because it's so embedded in their process that even making that change, it's very difficult to root that out and replace it with something else because their entire company has been running on this, custom software database ERP solution that, 3 people in the entire world know how it's built. It's not documented. There's no support.
Yeah.
And those are the types of things that we try to warn people away from if possible. I mean, does your technology roadmap mean I'm going to write my own custom software for my organization, or am I going to try to find a highly adaptable, customizable piece of software that's got some support on the back end? What are the pros and cons of those things? Like, and throwing out a curveball here, what about the advent of AI? We talked about this
Sure.
a little bit before the call. That might actually accelerate this cycle of technology refresh, and how do we know when to jump in? And in our organization, we're starting to experiment with some AI tools, the classic chat GPT. Not necessarily, we're looking at it to, if we're already a subject matter expert on it, we're starting to have these prompts, getting better at prompt engineering is what they call it these days. And what are the outputs, and are the outputs valid? Do they make sense? And does that help us, get to a better place faster? And it's pretty impressive. I mean, you can get some amazing output just in a few minutes if you know how to ask the right questions. So,
yeah,
how do you see AI changing the landscape here in the next, let's say, a year? Because nobody knows beyond a year with AI initiatives.
I agree.
Is it companies adjusting their technology roadmap if they have one? And that's certainly going to be a component of a new technology roadmap, is how is this going to help us figure these things out?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Well, I think for today's space, what I've been advising our clients in today's world is start drafting, have your senior technology leader, whether it's a CIO, IT director, IT manager, or get your technology partner to work hand in hand with your HR department to start drafting chat GPT and AI policies around for your employees, because a lot of employees, younger employees, are starting to use these tools. You don't know what they're putting in these tools. You don't want them, again, putting your financial information in and having it do it, having your financial analyst outsource their work to chat GPT. And I'm joking, but I'm not, because I'm sure there's ridiculous things that are going on even at some of my clients where these young analysts or people are putting stuff in. They don't realize that that's being stored somewhere. So that's what I'm advising organizations first. I really think, though, I'm starting to see. So what we started seeing here at Net at Work is a concept called a digital operating platform, where basically a DOP has the centerpiece of an advanced next generation ERP system. And that ERP system's like the pinnacle, and then you can build an ecosystem around that ERP, CRM, HRMS, AR, AP automation solutions, whatnot, and it kind of syncs. It's almost plug and play to a certain standpoint. But at the center point of these next generation ERP solutions are building AI technologies.
Right.
So we're already seeing. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. I'll follow up in a sec.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we're already seeing our clients go in and buy these next generation ERP solutions that have built-in AI capabilities like AP automation. Another thing that I've seen and I've started talking to our clients about is start thinking about your AI tools as an employee. Give it a name, because when you say, "Okay, what can Sam do for Sue to help relieve Sue?" Well, what can the AI component do for Sue to help relieve her? And so what we've started seeing is organizations literally naming their AI systems. And then it's like, well, you're talking about a person almost. How can that person help alleviate some of the redundancies and some of the tediousness from other people's jobs? And we've seen more momentum. It's almost like this different mindset that companies are starting to have with that.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to Paul Retzer at the Marketing AI Institute, and he talks about these topics pretty extensively. And one of the things he talks about is the AI positioned as an assistant to someone who has subject matter expertise, and it really streamlines and makes their job more effective and efficient. The other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of the big players, Google, Microsoft, Meta, HubSpot, they're starting to embed these systems in their tool sets already. So, Copilot for Microsoft, for instance, and the promise is that there can be a little bit more security built into that, as opposed to the Wild West of just a native chat GPT. And you don't want to throw sensitive material into that because you really don't know where it's going. But they'll have these sort of like security silos with these bigger players, and that's part of the upgrade, if you will. But we're expecting our clients to start asking us about these tools, and we're working to get ahead of that. So I think definitely a new component of the technology roadmap is these considerations. And if anything, it sort of makes the technology roadmap even more imperative at this point, because things are changing very quickly, just in that one area. But it speaks to what companies should be trying to do in a regular cadence to make sure that they're spending correctly and wisely in their technology investment, and really trying to look at it as it's not just an expense. It really is an investment, and you should get a good return on your investment. And having that roadmap helps to ensure that you're spending money in the right places. You've got the right cadence. You've got the right tools in place. And to your point, you're not stepping on different departments and creating more problems. Because if you go down a path and it's the wrong path, then you got to start all over again and do something different. So it does take a fair amount of consideration and planning. And to that end, yeah, I think you could do it internally, but I think having at least someone from the outside coming in to sort of provide their expertise and insight could be valuable. Let's see, we're coming up to our section on Q&A. So if you're listening to the podcast live, feel free to drop some Q&A questions in here. It looks like we have a few already. So here's one that kind of speaks to what we were talking about a little bit. Also curious if there are specific metrics or KPIs that I should track to measure the success of these technology initiatives on the roadmap. So, Eric, what are your thoughts on specific metrics and KPIs? I have my thoughts on this, but I'm curious to hear yours.
Yeah, Todd, I think it really varies across organizations as to what you're really trying to track. I mean, like finance is pretty standard. So I always tell people if you're gonna, financial metrics are pretty standard and they're probably easier to measure and say, what you should be tracking. Like I tell people, measure, figure out your finance first because that's easy. It's standardized. The operations side of the business, it really depends for the business and it really depends on the industry. Todd, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I concur. I think you're right. The financial side of it, I mean, everyone's like, hey, all I care about is the bottom line. Well, okay, but how do you get from, different revenue streams and costs and gross profits and blah, 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 and P&Ls and balance sheets. And, those are things that could be measured. What was that, Peter Drucker? What gets measured gets done type of thing. I think that speaks to the roadmap concept as well. In my experience, I think it goes down to the department level. Every functional department in an organization, you're going to have finance, you're going to have HR, marketing, sales, operations. I would say operations is probably the wild card. The other ones are going to have some industry standards, but you need to have them. You need to figure out, well, what do we need to measure to be effective? Operations is the one that's going to be different for every organization depending on what industry they're in. If they're manufacturing, they're going to have outputs they need to be profitable. If you're a service organization, it's going to be effectiveness of your your staff. How effective are they at utilizing their time, and how effective are they? Like in our case, we measure how much time do we spend on a service request from a client across the entire organization. And there are industry KPIs that indicate how profitable you're going to be depending on how much time you spend on it. And it's in the fractions of minutes, meaning that if it's 1 minute, you're not profitable. If best in class is like 15 minutes, and so you drive to that number. So how do you build a technology roadmap that helps you achieve, drive those numbers down and make your service team more effective? And that's our case. I'm sure it's similar to a lot of industries, and hopefully they've identified what those are. In our case, it's a lot of documentation. We believe if we have a culture of documentation, we can be more effective across the board, providing our services, kind of on the day-to-day. We're talking, this is like the day-to-day, like service team type thing. And then that gives us more time to be more strategic with clients down the road. So that's what we're driving. That is the vision and the reason why we're driving to be as efficient as we possibly can on the day-to-day, so we can spend more time helping clients develop these roadmaps and be more of a consultative value add, if you will. Let's see, what do we have? I think we might have touched on this, but how do you ensure that the technology roadmap remains flexible enough to adapt to changes in the market? So this probably goes to the AI discussion a little bit. So what are the best practices to make sure that the technology roadmap is not obsolete or it's current, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I tell people like this is not set in stone, right? I mean, I'm like the technology roadmap, it should be adaptable. Things change. Acquisition opportunities come up. COVID happened. Everybody had to adapt with COVID. Go from working in the office to working remote. There were supply chain issues, all sorts of stuff. So I tell people, like, review it on a quarterly basis, but if you need to change stuff, then change it. That's okay. It's a planning tool. Like if I'm planning on, I don't know, getting a new addition on my house, but my roof I'm planning on that in the summer, and my roof started leaking, then I'm not going to say, well, the addition on my house came first. I'll just deal with this leaky roof for another 12 or 18 months. And no, fix the roof first and push it to the next summer, or the addition on the house. I mean, it's pretty basic. That's my 2 cents on it. Is it should be adaptable.
Yeah. So if you have a disciplined cadence of revisiting that document and using it as it should be, as it's intended, which is a guide, then you can make adjustments as you go. And I just thought about this. I mean, when you're building out a roadmap for your clients, are you including things like incident response plans, which is a little bit more technology focused, like if there's a cyber event or some sort of a prolonged outage, but are you also including like business continuity, which is a little bit different? It deals more with the actual business operations, notwithstanding the technology components. So is that part of your road mapping? Like, hey, you don't have a business continuity plan, you need to have this put in place, and it needs to be tested, once a year.
That's the key, is the testing.
Right, to make sure, like a tabletop exercise, like, okay, it doesn't have to be a technology event. It could be, it could be a hurricane, it could be an earthquake, it could be a building fire. How do we continue operations? Because some clients, some organizations face financial, like, fines. Like if they have an outage.
Sure.
There was an event where this supplier to the big three automakers was being fined like $20,000 an hour because they had an event and they had to like get their production line up and running again. So that's the return on investment of having a functional, business continuity plan or an incident response plan, literally is probably pennies on the dollar of what they're investing into that, to have that capability to get up and running quickly and have a contingency plan. So let's see. I think we covered the questions. Yeah, we have a question here about how often it should be reviewed and updated. We covered that. And well, this one we might have a little bit of a different take on. So I think this will be the last question here, unless we get another one in. How do you balance short-term technology needs with long-term strategic goals on the roadmap? So that might be a little bit of your house analogy, but can you give us a little bit more maybe a specific story or example of a client you worked with that was struggling with short-term technology needs versus a longer-term roadmap type of thing?
Yeah, so I think one of the best examples is, people hire us and they want to talk about, like, oh, I want, they have this vision of like an automated, best in class, futuristic organization in mind. And I always we got to start with basics, right? And I tell people, you want to use AI on your customer data, your data is trash. You haven't entered data in your CRM solution. It's like you have 5 different names for the same customer. It's difficult to be able to use an AI. So I start with telling people we got to start with basics. And Todd, one of the things that you mentioned is the security aspect. What's your security situation look like? That is the last thing anyone wants to do, is talk to us about security. But I always tell them, well, the last thing you really want to do is call me because you have a security incident and you can't log into your computers because there's a green screen that says you're being hacked or something like that. And so short term is usually not the glamorous type things. It's usually getting the house in order to set ourselves up for long-term success, like implementing a next generation ERP system with AI built-in functionality. That's glamorous. Putting together a business continuity plan and testing it, no, I mean, everybody rolls their eyes at that until they need something like that, and then they see the validness of that suggestion from us. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it varies by this, kind of the size of the business and the vertical. I think a lot of times if we're talking about smaller businesses, let's just say under 100 employees, um, a lot of times it's difficult to carve out sort of the mental bandwidth to really tackle these things. I remember even when our company was much smaller, we recognized that we were not going to be able to grow unless we started building this, culture. It's like an internal culture of like process, procedure. And you're right, it's not fun. It's like, hey, we're a small business. We all get along, and, we just, chat over the cubicles and such. But there was a couple of drivers for us. Was we recognized that we would not be able to scale our business much more without really revamping this whole infrastructure, this framework. And we did it. I mean, and we were able to, it took a couple of years. We did this on the operations side, we did this on the finance team side, started doing it on the sales team side. And then you have something that, can actually scale to a whole nother level without, it's not that it's easy, but it's not impossible. It can be done, and you have the organizational framework that's solid enough. It's got a good enough foundation that you can actually grow that business and provide, the services or whatever it is that your organization does. You're going to be able to, provide your best in class solution to more and more people. So, and that is kind of the vision of what a lot of companies want to do. They want to grow. It's not just for the sake of growth. They want to do it because they believe in what they're providing their clients and their customers. So, so I think we're pretty close to the end here. Unless there's any other questions, any other insight from you, Eric, that we didn't cover that we want to touch
No,
on?
I think that's it. I think we kind of hit the nail on the head. I do want to say that we all recently put together a white paper that really goes through, I think it's like over 10 pages or 14 pages long, about best practices for putting together a technology roadmap and how to do it, what should be in it, and components. And so if you're looking for something in terms of thought leadership, take a look at that. And it was just published this past summer, which is really relevant because white papers on this subject 3 or 4 years ago don't even address some of the stuff that we're talking about in this white paper, because technology has changed so much since then. 4 years ago we weren't even COVID. No one even heard of COVID 4 years ago, or work from home, or all these supply chain issues. So it's a great resource for people.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 pretty interesting case studies on how organizations, jumped into this endeavor and did the work. And there's a button here I see at the bottom of the screen, and one of them's, small company, mid-sized company, and even like Domino's Pizza of all things. But it was how they were able to, get this vision in place and actually execute on it, and it very tangible results out of that you could directly tie back to sort of the planning. Now, Domino's Pizza obviously is a huge corporation, but I think some of the lessons filter down to even small businesses, and sort of the importance of some of this planning. It's just not that difficult. You just have to, it's like an exercise program. You got to, take those, lift that first set of weights, or get out and do that first jog or whatever, and just start making it a habit.
And I think it's interesting, the Domino's example, because you start, when you read through it, you're asking yourselves, is Domino's still a pizza company, or are they a technology company? I actually don't know the answer to that. I would maybe say they're a technology company. I like their tech a little bit more than I like their deliverable. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that is one of the, as your business, even a small business, as you sort of become more and more operationally mature, you start having these processes in place, there is a tipping point where suddenly, you know, you have the opportunity to provide this type of guidance and insight to other organizations, you know, even in your own industry, or, you know, your client, your customer base or your client base. There's a point in time when it actually might flip over. So your comment about, you know, is Domino the pizza company, or are they now, you know, building out these super high tech efficiency platforms for other companies? And, you know, pizza is just an afterthought. I think I used to work for United Parcel Service, and that's a similar story. I mean, they were delivering packages, and they became one of the biggest logistics companies in the world, right?
Yeah.
And studying all kinds of KPIs and metrics, and so maybe that's why I got inspired to pay attention to that type of thing. So, well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I hope we provided value to our listeners. And download the white paper and start thinking about implementing a technology roadmap, and kind of using that as a guide to get your business to the next level. So thank you so much.
Thank you.